master's working.
I think
evening, everyone. Just a quick note, we're going to hold off for about 5 minutes while we're working out some tech issues here, and hopefully we'll be able to get Otherwise, are we ready? All right, good evening, everybody. Tonight is Monday, June 12th, 2023. I've got 7 o'clock. Before we get started, well, I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole to order. Before we get started with our agenda, I just want to make one note for the record. We are recording, but not live streaming, so we will get that recording up as soon as possible after the meeting. Our wonderful Mr. Schultz is working on some technical difficulties for us, but just wanted to make that clear for the record. Okay, we will get started with items from the Planning Commission. Ordinance 45-2023. This was an ordinance to amend the official zoning map regarding the Crescent Woods Apartments. And this evening we have a representative from Underhill and Hodge representing the applicant, Mr. Zartman.
Thank you, Chair Weaver. Members of the committee. My name is Eric Zartman. I am an attorney to represent the applicant on this rezoning application. We are respectfully requesting that the ordinance be passed as emergency legislation for the benefit of the public health and safety of the residents of Gahanna. Short background on this. This site was previously rezoned to limited manufacturing residential district back in 2020. It's generally the same plan as what was being proposed now for the ordinance next week. That plan was not developed, and one of the major reasons why is the north boundary of that previous rezoning boundary was adjusted to make room for a new office tenant parcel on this overall 40-acre site. So the general master plan for the site is 40 acres. We're requesting rezoning on about 16 acres of that to the multifamily residential district. The rest of it is in a select planned commercial district, which will propose to be developed as an office tenant, and then also some general commercial for future development. Central Ohio is going to be experiencing a population boom over the next until 2020 or 2050. A lot of the there's going to be a greater demographics of seniors, and also only about 20% of families with kids. So there's going to be a new population in Gahanna looking for many different types of housing options. And we think what we propose here, a multifamily district, is going to be one of those things that we need to increase the housing stock in Gahanna. So by increasing housing stock and more options, it would be better for the citizens of Gahanna by having quality choices of where to live. Now, this project is also tied directly to the proposed office tenant on this site as well. They don't need to be rezoned. They already filed for their final development plan earlier in June. However, their project is being held up by the course of this rezoning application. These sites are tied together because they're under the same grading plan as their adjacent parcels one to one another. And then, that process can't start until this rezoning is completed, and that's also tied as well to the proposed right-of-way that is going to be in there. So public infrastructure, proposed office is being tied up by the process of this zoning. So if this zoning were to be granted or to be approved as emergency legislation, the whole site could immediately start to be developed, and the grading plan and the roads and all those plans can be worked on. Now, the office tenant is proposed is under some tight timing parameters, and at this point they are very close to being at the point where they need to extend their current lease rather than develop this brand new building on this site. So approving this zoning legislation by ordinance will allow the office tenant to be more comfortable to proceed with their plans to develop their property and not have to look at other options such as extending their current lease or looking at other sites. The proposed payroll of this office is about $25 million annually, and so these tax dollars will also serve to benefit the citizens of Gahanna in a positive manner. And then also, again, the public infrastructure is also tied to the grading plan, which is also tied to this rezoning that we're asking for emergency. So if the zoning were to be approved as an emergency legislation, everything can move forward to the benefit of the citizens of Gahanna. Try to keep it short, but I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Zartman. And just as a matter of process, I want to thank Clerk Van Meter. So currently, the ordinance is slated for our Tuesday, June 20th meeting on our consent agenda. If it was the will of council to move forward with the emergency, the ordinance would have to be amended and would have to come off the consent agenda. Is that correct, Mr. Clerk? All right,
Yes.
thank you. Director Blackford, did you have anything you wanted to add before we go to questions and comments from my colleagues?
Thank you very much. Just to echo what Mr. Zartman had said, he is correct in that the request for June 20th that'll be voted on is for a multifamily project, just over 16 acres, 290 plus units. However, that request, that project does affect other developments within the Crescent. And as he stated, there's a 9-acre site, 60,000 square feet of medical office that is holding pattern. They cannot begin construction until the rezoning is approved. The reason being is that property does not have access. Access will be provided, roadway construction, through the multifamily project. So the very first thing that I learned in economic development, literally the first thing was that time kills all deals. A 30-day wait period when folks are ready to begin construction. In this particular case, with a very sensitive timeline, it does jeopardize the potential success of that office project. So administration, we are supportive of the emergency. Would just also add one other point in that, as Mr. Zartman was saying, there's been multiple iterations of the request before you to be voted on June 20th. It dates back to 2020. Between the multiple rezoning requests, planning commission applications, and development agreements, it's been discussed in settings such as this 20 plus times. In those 20 plus meetings, there's been very minimal comments from the public, and there hasn't been any comments on the 2023 applications. So just wanted to add that. And again, administration, we are supportive of the granting of the emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Questions or comments from colleagues? Yes, Ms. Bowers.
Mr. Zartman, as Director Blackford mentioned, we've seen this through the development agreement. We've talked through this Crescent project for quite a long time, and it's an exciting project. And I'm grateful to Mr. Canini for having worked missing my words here, but diligently on bringing together this project. I guess I wanted to make sure that I understood, maybe from the city attorney, the process on this, because we've already done a public hearing and a first reading without emergency. And so I wanted to get clarity on the legality of the process and why, perhaps, maybe if someone could help me understand why we're doing it at this stage, perhaps than a month ago.
Sure. I can answer your question why we filed the request Friday before last. So we have bi-weekly meetings with the planning department, and we run through all the issues of logistics of figuring out what one project's doing one another, and then that's when we discovered that we're going to have a timing issue. It came up recently, so As soon as we had that meeting, discovered that we were going to have some issues, that's when we immediately filed this request for emergency legislation.
Since it's only emergency and not waiver, we can go ahead and do this. The reason being, emergency doesn't take away any rights that belong to people. What it says is the law goes into effect immediately instead of waiting the 30 days. The people still can try to have the law set aside, but they just don't have the 30-day time period to file it and perhaps get an injunction or something like that. So that's why you can still go ahead, since it's just going to be an emergency, since we're not removing any of their rights. And so I would say it's fine.
And thank you, Mr. City Attorney. And if you could, does this fall under the health, safety, and welfare requirement of an emergency?
I guess that would be up for you guys to decide.
Mr. Zartman, would you mind speaking to that a little bit further?
Sure. I think the most critical part about the health, welfare, and safety is ensuring that these jobs do come to Gahanna. The tax dollars that the jobs create are going to flow through the city and improve the public health, safety, and welfare in that way. And as I said earlier, I think it's important with the growing population in Central Ohio that residents have a lot of options to choose from when they're picking their home.
Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Angela.
We have been waiting for this for so many years, not months, not weeks, years, and it's going to be an amazing things that will happen for our community. And indeed, we need to move on, and so you can get your building done, and we can get our housing. Let's move on. It's time to go. And I think this absolutely, we should give it emergency so that it can start. My feelings.
Can I just correct something?
Yes, Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, I apologize. I did want to correct a misstatement. The public hearing will occur at the time of the second reading, so there will be a public hearing on June 20th. Okay, thank you.
And clearly it's fine, yeah.
Anything else, colleagues? So it sounds like,
Emergency.
so it sounds like, well, Mr. Clerk,
I meant to say not on the consent agenda.
thank you. Not on consent on the regular agenda. We'll have, that way someone can move to amend to incorporate the emergency request. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zartman. Thank you, Mr. Canini. Thank you, Director Blackford. Next up, item C, a motion authorizing the Director of Engineering to bid contract for Gahanna Water Tower Rehabilitation Project, motion 13-2023. Good evening, Director.
Good evening. The staff is requesting permission to bid capital maintenance on the water tower. Work includes sandblasting, painting, cleaning, sealing, as well as some improvements to access ladders, vent access, and hatches as part of our capital maintenance requesting permission to bid.
Yes, Ms.
When was a water tower built? We were trying to think.
I can tell you the last time that it was maintained was of this magnitude with the grout down on the tower and painted was when I was here before. So
Okay.
I recall the previous water resource engineer going through similar activities with the dating of the tower. I can get back to you.
Okay.
So I guess in that vein, similar question, how frequently do these sort of repairs should happen?
I'd say every 20 to 25
Okay. And I know it's just it's a motion to bid, and so we're looking for some estimates or bids from contractors, but any sort of estimate from your office?
We're looking slightly under $1 million worth of activity.
No. Any other comments?
So
Mrs.
there would be a supplemental?
Ms. Bowers, yes.
Okay, just to be clear.
Yes. And that'll come forward at the time of bid, and we'll have an exact figure after the
Anything else from my colleagues on this one? Consent, okay then.
Yep.
All right, thank you, Director. Next up, items from the Department of Finance. Ordinance 49-2023, authorizing a supplemental appropriation, Central Park TIF and water capital funds for transfers out. Director Burry, good evening.
Good evening, everybody. So the first action is kind of a reappropriation. So if you remember, the agreements were changed late December of 2022 as it relates to Tech Center Drive. We had some changes in appropriations to transfer dollars over so we could meet the new pledge security agreement. Just the timing of when that was approved, it just didn't happen. So unfortunately, those types of appropriations lapse at year end, and we have not completed our obligations under the security. So just asking to reappropriate those dollars so we can get them transferred and meet our obligations under the security agreement.
Colleagues? All right, first and consent, okay with that one? Okay. Next item, please, Director. Ordinance 50-2023.
So this is for the mayor's court, requesting a supplemental appropriation of $15,000 for interpreter services. There's a couple things. One, we're seeing an increase in the need, and we are required by law to provide those services. And they also increase the minimum hour requirement, moving it from 1 hour to 2 hours. So it's increased the cost and resulting in a need for additional appropriations.
Questions from colleagues? Yes, Ms. Bowers?
Who, is it the agency that we're contracting with, or was that a judiciary decision?
It's the agency we're contracting with. We did shop around to see if there are better, but problem is you have to have individuals that are certified to provide this type of services under the courts. And we didn't find much wiggle room as far as pricing from one to the next.
All right, thank you.
And if I may,
City Attorney.
another thing that we're doing in Mayor's Court is we've now consolidated so that all of the Spanish-speaking individuals are, that require interpreters are every other week. So instead of having to bring them out every week, we only bring them out every other week, and then that way we try to accommodate that 2-hour time period. Also, we do that in conjunction with New Albany. If you remember, we do New Albany Mayor's Court as well, right after ours. So we move them all also. They used to be arraignments at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now we move them to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so the interpreter doesn't get there till 1, does us, and then goes and does New Albany. So that's just ways we were trying to keep the costs down.
Yes, Ms. Bowers, you had a follow-up?
Just that, I was going to ask if this cost will be shared with New Albany as well.
Yes, they do pay for their portion of the interpreter services.
Is that already reflected in what we're supplementally appropriating, or would we be reimbursed in the future?
So the way that it kind of works is we look at the cost per case from the previous year to set the rates for the next year. So the 2024 rates that will be set will include these additional costs as a look back to how much it costs to run the court.
So for 2023, New Albany wouldn't be responsible for any of these increased costs for the next 6 months?
Well, they're paying for the any additional costs that would have come from 2022. So that look back is very similar to how Franklin County runs their courts. So like we get billed early January, February for our previous year's activity. So we took a similar approach, looking at a previous full year to determine what is the cost per case and then applying that to how many cases they have.
It's a look back and we settle up.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Bowers.
I didn't know that there were, it's great that there's such services now because we have more people that don't speak English, but when, years back when there were not so many people in court that needed an interpreter, I know that they would occasionally call to the high school and the Spanish teacher would run over and interpret, and then she would run back to class because it wasn't frequent.
Right.
And so it's great that they have somebody that can do that now on a regular basis.
Anything else on this one? First and consent, okay then? Thank you, Director. Next up, item E, items from council office. Resolution 21-2023, resolution designating June 2023 as Alzheimer's Awareness and Brain Health Month. I asked Clerk Van Meter to update the resolution that we did last year, so this is a very similar item. Questions, comments from colleagues? Consent okay for that one? I expect we may have some guests next week. So. Okay, thank you. Any additional business for the Committee of the Whole? All right, we'll go ahead and adjourn Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick note, are we stopping the recording at all or just continuously go? Okay, so we don't have a live stream right now, but we are recording.
Okay, fair enough. All right, does anybody need 5 or anything like that, or are we going to power through?
We've had
Power
10
through?
minutes
Okay.
already.
All right, we're good to go? Mr. Clerk? All right. Let's call to order the June 12th, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee. We have 2 discussion items on the agenda this evening. The first one is a Q1 financial report, 2023. And so with that, I believe, as per usual, Director Burry, once you're all booted up there, you will have the floor.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the first quarter today for the general fund, each of the special revenue funds that receive income taxes, what those income tax trends kind of look like through the end of the first quarter, what our investments look like, and then a conclusion based on those Q1 results. So first, we're going to look at general fund revenue. So compared to the budget, we're at 30%, which is where you kind of expect to be this time of the year. Income tax coming in at 25%. Property taxes at 49%. It's collected and distributed twice a year in March and August, so that's right where it should be. Charges for services running a little high. We have some additional shelter and sports fields rentals are up compared to the first quarter of 2022. And we also received the Creekside rent payment in the first quarter. Interest and investment income, we expected a very large increase there, and it's tracking as intended and actually looking like we may actually exceed our projections, already bringing in 54% through the first quarter. Compared to 2022, looking at a 9% increase in income tax, and we'll focus on that a little bit further on. In total, we're up about 18% compared to 2022. Big part of that is the charges for service, as mentioned, more rentals in the Creekside rent report. We also have the interest and investment income almost 9 times what it was at 2022 first quarter. You'll see a dip in the other revenue, and that's related to those one-time EV charging stations reimbursements that we received in 2022. So that's basically revenue. Any questions on that end?
Anything from council on GF revenue Q1? All right, seeing none.
Okay, moving on to expenditures. Again, right where we would expect to be at the end of the first quarter, running at about 21% of planned. Compared to the previous year, we're up 15%, mainly due to salaries and benefits, which was expected. We partially implemented the pay plan that was approved in 2022. This is showing that full implementation of that amended pay plan. We had the negotiated increases that were expected, and then also new positions and filling some vacancies through the first quarter of the year. Looking at materials and supplies, that's mainly driven by inflation. Our fleet parts, utility costs are all in there, so those are all up. On the contract service side, similar, we're kind of up based on increased cost. And then I believe we also had, a little bit higher on the, that's what I wanted to talk about. So some of the contract service piece is also timing related to the new insurance. So typically, we would pay that in the second quarter. So you'll see this kind of level out a little bit as we move into Q2. The insurance premium for the new risk insurance came the first quarter versus it was paid the second quarter of 2022. Any questions on the expenditure side?
Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, does the salaries and benefits include the latest round of additional hires that we approved?
So no, so those will be reflected in Q2.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is just what happened through the end of March. So we would not have had those new positions online yet. But it would have been anything that was approved during the appropriation process that we would have been managed to fill in that first quarter.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Anything from council on general fund expenditures in Q1? Ms. Bowers.
Would you mind explaining the principal retirement line item?
Sure. Those are the litigation bonds. Those are related to the litigation settlement for the income tax. Remember, we took out our litigation bonds for those. So those are being retired from the general fund. Payments occur in June, would be interest, and then again in December would be the principal and the remaining interest for the year. So that's why you're not seeing an activity for Q1.
Thank you.
Anything further from council on general fund expenditures? All right, moving on.
Looking at other financing sources and uses, so this is your transfers out. You're seeing an increase compared to last year. This was planned. More is needed from the general fund to cover debt service payments. That goes into the bond retirement fund, and there are other funds that pay for a portion of the debt through intergovernmental receipts, pilot payments, so on. The advance in, you'll see, went down quite a bit. This represents the last payment that the water fund will be making. This is associated with two advances that were made in 2016 and 17, I believe, were the years. So this is the final payment from the water fund repaying the general fund. In total, we're seeing a net change in fund balance of about 1.5 million, bringing our total fund balance for March to almost 30 million. We have about 6.6 of that reserved for encumbrance, and then we have the increase in the emergency reserve intact at 7.45 million. That leaves us with an unencumbered available balance of almost 16 million, represents about 7 months worth of operating expenses, way more than the 2 required by policy.
Anything from council on fund balance? All right, seeing none, moving on, Joanne.
So taking a little bit of a different approach when it comes to the special funds, hopefully this will help a little bit and speed things going through the report because the results are very similar. So this first thing that you're seeing is all 3 funds lined next to each other, comparing them to the budget for the year. So you'll see across the board, they're all 3 income tax, very similar to the general fund at 25%, right where you would expect to be. In total, revenue for public safety and public service are right at that 25% mark, where you would expect to be for the year. Parks and Rec, you'll see it at 18, which makes sense. Their season does not start until Q2, going into Q3, so we'll kind of see that go up as we go through the year. Expenses is the same story. Looking at salaries and benefits, those planned increases based on the pay plan amendments, negotiated agreements, so forth. You'll see for Parks and Rec that lower percentage compared to budget, and again, that's based on when their season starts. As we go through the year, you'll see that increase. On the public service end, this is that continued vacancy issue that we were kind of having moving through the end of the year and into the first quarter. So they are coming up to being fully staffed through the end of the second quarter, so we should see that kind of increase a little bit and normalize a little. Looking at fund balance based on those actual results for all 3 funds, there was money added back to unreserved fund balance, and you can see where we're ending for each of those as of the end of the first quarter. So that's compared to the budget. Any questions before I move on, comparisons to actual?
Anything from council on special revenue funds, actual versus budget? I'll just add that some top-notch budgeting when you can hit the nail on the head 25% through Q1.
Oh, very impressed with myself. It's all me.
We love you.
Moving on to how that compared to the actual results of 2022. So again, looking at very similar numbers to where we were with the general fund, seeing revenue increasing as we compare that to the first quarter of 2022, mainly based on increased activity. For the income tax, you'll notice those percentages look a little wonky. Every year we analyze what their operating budgets are going to be, what other revenue they have coming in, and we adjust that portion of the allocation that's sent to those funds. So those percentages that you see for changing an income tax are mainly driven by that change in the allocation, as well as the overall increase. Looking at salaries and benefits, materials and supplies, and contract services, again, very similar to the general fund, those expected increases that we had planned on. And again, that timing of the premium for the insurance coming in Q1 versus Q2 of 2022.
Anything from council with regard to, I guess, year-on-year, quarter-to-date? All right, moving on.
So looking at the capital improvement fund, again, right where you would want to be as far as revenue. On the expenditure side, we're only at 3%, but again, that's based on construction season. So that'll start to pick up as we move into Q2 and Q3. We'll see those numbers kind of increase. Looking at the end of the quarter, adding back about 3.7 million, bringing total fund balance to about 22.6. 17 million of that is reserved, leaving us with an available balance of about 5.6 million that's unreserved. And then on pages 4 and 5 of your report are the two tables that kind of break down what represents those costs as far as projects and what represents those encumbrances. It's broken down by type, and then there's a more detailed list by project.
Anything from council on the capital improvement fund? Okay, it's pretty painless.
All right. So that is pretty much it for comparative data. So now we're going to talk a little bit about income tax. So this is showing the 1.5% and the 1%. Broken down by collections, withholding, individual, net profit. As we were expecting, we're seeing that withholding still running high. We're still in an economic expansion at this time, which is nice. On the individual side, looking at the underlying data, it just looks like we have early filers for this year compared to last year. Nothing really stuck out. Just looks like more people filed early. So I believe that's what's driving that individual increase for the first quarter. On the net profit side, kind of hopeful to see that kind of turn around a little bit, and we'll keep monitoring that. But when it comes to the net profit, that's probably the one that has the most variables that are really outside of our control. It's all about how individual businesses operate. So we'll just keep on looking at this and seeing if we kind of see that kind of spin back to what those pre-pandemic levels are. Any questions on income tax?
Anything from council on income tax trends? All right, moving on.
So now looking at our investments, most of our pooled cash is being held in investments with Star Ohio, long-term bonds and such. Our current yield to maturity is about 1.47 years, still keeping that kind of on the lower end, as we're kind of seeing the short term are still kind of making a little bit more. Looking to that long term, that 5 years is about how far out we can invest, and seeing it, is there any potential that we could move things out further as we're kind of seeing those interest rates play out a little bit more. Not much difference from the end of the year. Interest rates are still running high. They're planning to, at least through the third quarter, as they're trying to get that inflation tapped down, which does seem to be working. We went from a high of about 8.5% for inflation to about 5% by the end of the first quarter. So we are seeing that kind of come down a little bit. We're going to continue to take advantage of the high interest rates as we can and reinvest responsibly and safely.
Anything from council on investments? Joanne, the net cash, is that just bank deposits or something?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So really, at the end of the quarter, looking pretty good. We're seeing revenue stabilization. We're seeing those revenues and expenditure growth within our expectations. Economic conditions really haven't changed much since Q4. You know, we are still seeing that inflation come down, but interest rates continue to creep up. Hopefully, they'll steady out. And then really what we're expecting as we're moving into the next few quarters is that continued stabilization and seeing where we can kind of normalize operations.
Anything from council on Q1? So Joanne, do you have any insights, and I think you may have mentioned some of this during the budget process. So it seems that there are, obviously we're kind of late cycle with regard to where the Fed's at. Like you said, they're trying to get inflation tamped down by tightening monetary conditions, and that's expected to work. The labor market seems to be holding the whole thing together, which obviously is good, at least for the city with regard to withholdings and individual filings. Do you have just any insight on how a broader slowdown may or may not impact the city here locally? Or I suppose the local economy is the way to maybe ask that question.
I mean, as that recession is kind of planning on kind of hitting maybe late.
Yeah, do you expect us to fare better, about the same?
I really don't expect much change.
Okay.
They have said from the beginning that recession for areas that are growing is kind of going to be like a blip,
Okay.
you know, because the growth is going so fast and there's so much coming, it's going to be hard to slow down unless it's a major recession.
Sure.
Similar to what we had in 2009, 8 timeframe. But as far as the economists are still predicting that it is going to be a very short, small recession, which shouldn't hurt those who are growing right now.
Okay. Well, we'll hope your crystal ball is accurate.
Yep.
Anything else from council on the Q1 report? No? Okay. Thank you so much. Next item on the agenda, looks like capital improvement plan. Council has a draft in front of them, and I trust the administration has a presentation for us this evening. A robust presentation. Well, Mr. Schultz, the floor is yours.
Good evening, folks. This presentation largely, it's in somewhat a summarization of where we were. I think when we were here, I think it was actually mid-April. I thought it was closer to the end of March, but I believe it was mid-April. When we introduced you guys to at least the document from a planning standpoint. You folks now have the document in front of you. The document itself, especially from a narrative standpoint, the first 20 or so pages, 30 pages, sections 1 through 3 really have not changed much. The slide deck here is largely the same as it was in March, because I just want to go over some highlights, and then we'll end up getting into some pertinent information as it relates to the specific projects that you guys are seeing now in sections 4 through the end of the document, which is really, I guess, where we would say the meat and potatoes is, with the details, though, being in the first 3 sections, because that's how the plan is actually applied to. That's how the plan is actually applied in the administration's world. So what you guys are seeing in front of you right now, and when my last slide will end on schedule, but this is the draft plan, okay? So this is a plan that's going to run through you folks over the next couple weeks here at committee, but then ultimately be asked for adoption sometime in August. And again, the last slide dictates the schedule, so we'll get into that as we get moving forward here. But basically, this is the beginning of the process and not the end of the process as we see it. So again, the biggest difference between what we used to see in a CNA, capital needs assessment, versus a CIP, is that this document, the CIP, really puts a whole lot more formal process around how the administration and how the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee is really structuring and really dictating the needs, wants, and desires of the city, and different projects that get programmed in various different years, as we'll see as we work through the plan here. The CNAs was largely a collection of projects. This year, the CIP really has the detail that's necessary in order for us to take a limited resource in the financial capital that we have and program that appropriately so that we are maximizing the use of those budget dollars and the citizens of the city of Gahanna are seeing the maximum benefit possible in any one given year. Just as a reminder, many of these projects, right, we just didn't pull these out of the air. This plan was informed all the way back from 2016 in the Go Forward Gahanna plan, all the way up to something that we've already heard about as far as the Parks Master Plan, right? Obviously, these are not the only places that we take projects from or that projects were born from, but these are largely the plans that went to inform the CNAs in the past and the CIP today and in the future. Obviously, plans or projects that have been completed are not reflected in the plan, but it's anything that's current at this particular point in time. Continuing to walk through, and again, this is how section 1 is outlined in the document. But every project that we have is categorized into one of these 6 different categories. Each one of these categories does have subcategories. So, for example, transportation mobility has things like bridges in it, traffic control. Utility systems would be your typical water, sewer, so on and so forth. Parks and recreation, anywhere from play elements to park renovations to pool infrastructure as subcategories for those project categories. Technology program even has a variety of different things, whether it be our Gahanna fiber network and or applications, core applications that we use maybe to manage finance or to manage the public works or engineering department in asset management, so on and so forth. So you'll see projects broken down and identified in a strategic way and organized that way as well. The plan has adopted, if you would, the priority system from the CNAs. So we basically have three priority structure. Priority ones are imperative to do or must do's. They are critical. Things like Mr. Comline talked about the water tower revitalization project. That is a must do. It cannot wait. We can't put that in a could do category in priority 3 as an example there. Priority 2s are essential and should do's. And then priority 3s are important and can do, would like to do, put a different set of words next to that. But then there is also a capital maintenance area and program with this particular plan, like there was with CNAs. As you guys know, and you guys have heard us talk about an awful lot about deferred maintenance and those types of things, we are still catching up on deferred maintenance, right? We're not going to snap our fingers one day and have everything that needs to be done in the city done. Asphalt overlay and street rebuilds is probably a good example of this, right? We do those projects every year, and it's really a project that we do every year that's maybe it impacts citywide. And then basically the list of items, the list of streets in this particular instance is what really changes. So we don't have, Main Street as a asphalt overlay project, and we don't have, individual courts listed, right? It's one project that falls under capital maintenance, and we do that project year in and year out. It's just the details of it that's changed, and in this instance, it's the streets that change. So capital maintenance is a big part of this plan. It's something that we will continue to have. It is something that we will continue to have and need to have in order to bring a lot of this maintenance to the forefront and get it addressed and ultimately fixed. Again, the last section in the last piece in section 1 is the budgeting and scheduling. So what are the different funding mechanisms that go into the CIP, right? When we talk about a capital project, I think it's really important to note, right? We're not just talking about projects that are eligible for issue $12. We're talking about capital investments that meet the definition that's defined by the finance department as a capital project. Sure, issue $12 do impact, and that's our largest dedicated pool of funding that can impact these projects, right? But TIFs, proprietary funds, local funds, grant funding, all go towards funding a lot of these different projects. So as we get deeper and deeper into this, again, I think that one of the things that the community needs to hear is that it's not just their issue $12 that go towards capital investments, it's other things as well. That's the biggest mechanism, but not the only mechanism. Probably what should have been at the bottom side of this is the capital budget, where it says the first bullet up there on the right-hand side where it says annual. The capital budget is the current year of the CIP. So in this instance, when we go for 24 budget approval, the 24 section, if you would, of the CIP will become the capital budget, the 2024 capital budget. And these things just roll and they're cyclical, okay? The other note that I will make very strongly here is that this is a living and breathing document, and these numbers, these projects, these things change from quarter to quarter to quarter, which you guys will begin to see here as we go through the next few slides and get a little bit deeper into the document here. Section 2 of the document really goes over the plan process, right? The plan process defines this advisory committee. The advisory committee is made up of the mayor, council president, council finance chair, the senior directors, and the director of finance. And then the stakeholders in those particular conversations and in those particular meetings end up being the directors who are bringing forth projects for incorporation into the CIP. Largely, this group is responsible for, the advisory committee is responsible for making recommendation to this body, council, as to what this plan looks like year to year to year and quarter to quarter to quarter. Right, so this is the process that any one particular project and or including, up to and including the whole entire document will go through. So the individual departments will assess a project. Let's talk about this from an individual project standpoint. They will put together a worksheet and a justification for said project. And I'm walking down the left-hand column right now. And then they will ultimately submit that project to the CIP Advisory Committee for recommendation for, they submit that project to the senior directors for presentation to the Advisory Committee. Ultimately, if the Advisory Committee would like, now I'm going up the middle column, the Advisory Committee would like that project presented to council and incorporated into the CIP, then the council action would be requested. If that council action is approved, it would be incorporated into the CIP, and then procurement and legislation processes would still follow and still flow as that project worked through the process. So just because something is in the CIP doesn't mean that you wouldn't have seen Mr. Comlank today making a motion for an invitation to bid, right? Or you wouldn't see a contract come before you guys that ultimately gets that work completed. So those processes still remain in place up to and including the project being incorporated into the CIP. As things are more well-known, right, and as studies are completed and more information is known, one of the things I talked about back in April was getting a alternative solutions or a good, better, and best solution presented to us in some of these instances. When we talk about West Side Gahanna sewers as an example, right, alternative solutions will be presented, good, better, best. Something will be selected. Those budget dollars will then be known. We will program those into the CIP for either for supplemental appropriation if necessary, and or in some instances, we may be even able to turn money back depending on exactly what that solution is and what might be encumbered, which we're going to get to here in a couple minutes. Capital maintenance, as I spoke about earlier, there is a minimum allocation towards capital maintenance recommended inside of the plan. Exactly what that number is, and I think that number probably shifts a little bit from year to year to year, but capital maintenance, again, as I already spoke about this evening, is an important component of this plan in order to make sure that we're being proactive and not reactive to some of the issues and challenges that we're facing. If we know that a water main, has consistently seen a number of breaks along a particular stretch, maybe we should proactively be looking at replacing that water main as opposed to just simply reacting to the new hole that's in the ground because water's spewing from the pipe at this particular point. We need to move towards a model of predictive maintenance and expense as opposed to one where we're, just assigning dollars and maybe hoping a problem doesn't arise or doesn't come up. That will also go a long way, obviously, in addressing our deferred maintenance as years and as this plan itself matures. One of the big things that's in the plan right now is a project expiration. So what our proposal is that projects that have not progressed, and again, like I said back in April, there are a multitude of reasons why a project doesn't necessarily progress. It's not because we're not actively working it. In some instances, maybe the solution was too expensive, or maybe the problem could have been addressed with operating dollars and not necessarily a capital project, because after study it was determined that maybe it was a smaller project, but we still had funds tied up. If those funds and that project doesn't move forward in a significant way in a 24-month period, those funds will be returned to the appropriate fund that they came from and reallocated as necessary to address other needs, right? Because in some instances, and what you'll see, I think it might even be the next slide, in some instances, we end up tying up our capital resources. We end up tying up our capital resources for a number of months and or potentially years, and that prohibits us from doing other things, because you can't promise $1 to two different projects. So we'll do a periodic review of all projects inside of the advisory committee. Projects that are in an inactive status or just require proper project closeout, those funds will be returned to their appropriate resting place and then reassigned as necessary. So, okay, we're working up to the next part here, but the plan timeline, section 3, chapter 3, if you would, really defines what you'll see as far as the projects go and how the projects are organized. So in each one of the plan worksheets there, you will see a prior year appropriation, so any encumbered funds that are being utilized against a particular project, right? We may have started the project in 2022, and now it is 2023, going to be 2024. Those funds haven't gone anywhere, so we're showing those in the prior year appropriation or an encumbered state. This slide here reflects the current 5 years. So the current 5 years of the plan, in this particular instance, what you guys have in front of you is 2023 to 2027. And then there's 5-year increments from that point moving forward. They are very well developed, and I think the program that you guys have in front of you is an extremely well-developed program for the next 5 years. I think as we get closer to 2038 and 2043, those words are hard for me to say right there, things become less known, right? And that's basically what we end up walking through, right? So in phase 1 of the plan, you see you only have a summary worksheet, right? So the plan, the project is listed, but there's not necessarily a worksheet, full-blown worksheet in the back, because budget estimates are based on our best known information, and it's really nebulous to know a project that's in 2032, as an example, exactly what that might cost us today. Next 5 years, again, 33 to 37. They're being considered for the CIP. They're maybe listed inside of the document. The budget lacks certainty, right? Is that a $1 million project, a $2 million project, or a $350,000 project, right? The budget lacks certainty because what are maybe some of the options that we could utilize and implore in order to get that project done? And again, you have summary worksheet only, and the summary worksheet is that if you're looking at it in the PDF, it's the 11x17 summary worksheet that lists all of the projects that also have a year. Same thing with year 5, which is again, that would be years 15 to 20. And lack of fully defined scope. We know that something needs to be done at some particular point in time, and the budget is largely unknown on those projects. So when we get into, of course, the one slide I need to show you guys wants to do that on me. Bear with it for a second. There we go. Okay, so the section 3 outlines, section 3 begins to outline in summary form the dollar amounts that are associated with each one of the project categories. You would notice on there, I'm going to flip to this real quick here in my document, but you will notice in that particular section, bear with me 1/2 second here, in that particular section, the projects are also listed and/or the dollars are also listed by subcategory as well, so that you guys can get a good idea. This year, what's reflected in the plan right now is the current year and built out through 2043 per the last slide. But basically what you're looking at here on the screen right now, and this still needs to be incorporated in the document. This is one of the few changes that needs to get into the document is the information that's on this slide. But basically what you are looking at are what our expenses have been and what the city has expended on, if you were to look at that first line, transportation and mobility, in 2020, 2021, 2022, and what we anticipate to spend in 2023. That's for all categories, all 6 of those categories. And then what you notice on the bottom line, not the grand total line, but the line up directly from that, is prior year encumbrance, and that's the line that I need to focus on for a moment. And it does get a little bit confusing. So when we have projects that span more than 1 year, more than 1 calendar year, that money is encumbered and carried over to the following year, okay? An old practice and a practice that we're going to stop doing is closing those POs out and opening them up in the new year. So at the end of 2022, we did not close any POs. Those POs remained open in the year 2022. So it didn't look like we were then opening up that money or you guys were allocating money towards 2023, right? So that $8.263 million that you guys allocated in 2023 is largely the budget number that you guys approved last year for the CIP, for the capital budget. Okay, we are using money, that's $17 million that's listed under 2022. We are utilizing that money in order to also fulfill projects in 2023. It's where it gets a little bit confusing. As we go in and as this plan matures year to year to year, that number will be dramatically less because we will not be closing POs out at the beginning of the new year and then reassigning that number to the current year. Okay, so basically this chart here in future years, and please, Joanne, correct me where I go wrong, jump in right over top of me. This chart here in future years will normalize that money so that money will always appear in the year in which you folks appropriated it. Yes, sir.
Is it fair to say that this slide accounts for substantially all issue $12, just given the
Yes, sir.
I'm just kind of putting together the look back. It's conveniently 2020, obviously passed in 2019, and we're looking at capital here. So I recognize that there could be some grant money included in this, but is it fair to say that we're looking at almost $70 million in issue $12 spent over the last, about 3.5 years?
Yeah, I would say the majority of that is the issue $12. We do have the other funds in there, but it by far exceeds the funding that comes from the other funds as far as capital.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll be able to pull that apart for you so you can see water fund versus capital fund, and so on and so forth.
So that, Mr. Schultz, takes us, what, through section 3?
That takes us the next, well, technically the next slide takes us through section 3. This here is the section 3 slide that you actually have in your document. This defines the current 5 years, phase 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so basically what you're looking at on this particular slide has nothing to do with expenses. This has everything to do with projects. Okay, so basically in this particular plan from 2023 all the way rolled up to 2043 has a price tag of $315,871,000 in projects identified throughout the plan. Okay, in years 1 through 5, so 23 to 27, that number is 185,000, north of 185 million. 185,000, I wish. Sorry. I've been nice, right, Mr. Renner? $185 million in projects. Okay, so what we'll look at as we walk down that column, the number in parentheses is the number of projects that we have identified just in the current 5 years. No, I'm sorry, that is inaccurate. That is what we have identified throughout the plan at this particular point in time. And if you were to add up all those numbers in parentheses, they add up to just south of 150 individual projects as their program. That's all projects, including capital maintenance. One of the things I would note on capital maintenance is there's 40 intersections with 40 traffic cabinets. And if we are going and rehabbing under a capital maintenance project, all 40 of those cabinets, that's technically 40 projects that are rolled up into one project under capital maintenance, as an example. If you were to take that $185 million and you were to divide that by 5, you come up with $37 million. $37 million annually that needs to be that needs to go towards the implementation of those particular projects. Obviously, one of the things that we have left to do with the CIP Advisory Committee is making sure that that number for 2024, what we'll be looking to you folks to pass in the capital budget, is something that meets the appropriations that we have available to us, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $17 to $18 million annually from issue 12 and the other proprietary funds as they come in. Right, so now when we look at that particular $185 million, go ahead, Joanne.
I was just going to say, for the facilities piece, there would obviously be bond,
Yes.
some sort of bonding or debt issuance. So even though that it does say in the first 5 years, that would obviously be the debt service payments that would be smoothed over that 30-year, potential 30-year period.
Right. So if you were to take the city facilities section out of this, just for argument's sake, you're at about $100 million. And if you spread that $100 million out over the 5 years, then you're looking at about $20 million, right? I do think, depending on exactly how things shake out and how we move things and parts and pieces around, to go back to this particular number here, of this $27 million, how much of this $27 million is actually money that we have tied up that can actually get returned back to a fund so that we can expend it on something else and into a fund balance in order to fund this project pool as we move forward. And I think while the $185 million over the next 5 years is a scary, scary number, I also think that it is a very reasonable and manageable number for us residents in the city of Gahanna to actually understand, get around, and program towards. Grants as an example, right? Price Roadhouse. Price Roadhouse is rolled up in that current 5 years under the Parks and Recreation Department. But yet Price Roadhouse is largely grant funded, right? So that project, even if it's 50% grant funded, right? That we are. Again, I'll go back to my statement earlier that just because this is a capital project doesn't mean that we are just using capital funds in order to address the needs, wants, and desires of you folks, the residents, and the administration. When we do look at phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, just as notes, those are largely, with maybe the exception of Parks and Recreation, those are largely the capital maintenance programs as they move forward. They're not escalated in any way. They're not escalated in any way. That's why you see utility systems at $15 million annually, basically straight across the board. So, well, not annually, sorry. Every 5 years, right? Yeah. And then city facilities, if you note, that includes 825, that includes Creekside, that includes the service garage in the current 5 years. The 60 million in phase 1, that is a community rec center. So basically saying that in the next 10 years, 23 to 33, that a community rec center would be programmed. Should that be in phase 1? Should that be in phase 2? Right, that's for things for us to still continue to flesh out and understand as the plan matures and as the CIP advisory group, this group here, gets to understand and know how the plan is functioning and what our resource availability actually is. Same thing for technology programs, that $410,000, and this is probably a great example, right? The $410,000 is for network switches, servers, and SAN storage to be replaced one time every 5 years, basically. Or, yeah, every 5 years or within those phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. But if somebody can tell me what a server switch looks like in the year 2043, I pay them a lot of money. Or how we were functioning in the year 2043, 2033 from a technology standpoint. So those numbers, while good and do inform the plan and get me to $315 million, some of those things past the current 5 years are a little bit more. They're definitely much more placeholder than they are, set in stone in any real meaningful way. Couple slides, and I promise to come back to this one. What you'll largely see is a summary worksheet here for each one of the different project categories, followed in section 10 by a summary worksheet, which then lists the years There'll be a summary worksheet by fund as well. That's currently not in the document, but for the document that gets introduced, I'm going to screw up the date, sometime in July. There'll be a project by fund appendix as well. That's the next section, and then you will see a detailed worksheet on each and every project that's listed in here. If we add but a handful of projects to the backside of this particular plan, that you guys will end up, that'll be introduced as a final draft in July, that would be a lot. I know there's 2 are missing because that's my mistake. They're actually in my Excel file that didn't get converted to a PDF. And if we were to add 3 more because they just, oh, I forgot about this particular one, I think that if I add more than 5, that would be a lot. So our next steps, we need to continue the project prioritization. So all of the departments have been through their work program. They've developed that summary sheet. We need to sit with the advisory committee, and we need to basically continue to do prioritization and ranking of projects. Obviously, that needs to be followed by the budget analysis. We have this much stuff to do. We have this much money. What needs to float to a different year? Public participation. So public participation actually starts, I would say, with the publication of the document this evening. Obviously, there's public comment at each of the next 2 council meetings. There's 2 public hearings, and then there's also a planned town hall for next Wednesday, which will go out on social media, be live streamed that is planned for next Wednesday at 6 p.m. in this particular room, like we've done other events. Largely, a very similar presentation will be given to the public to what we see here. Probably a little less detail, a little less granular, I'll say, not less detail.
Is that the 21st?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Ultimately, CIP adoption, and then followed by the operating and capital budget adoption. And I have that up there because basically what you guys adopt as the CIP will be a drop-in piece for the budget, for budget season back in October, November. So this is the plan timeline more formally outlined. So draft CIP circulated to council for the week of June 5th. That was last week. Finance committee, which is where we are here today. June 21st, the town hall presentation and discussion. We can have more conversation with questions, comments, and concerns that you folks might have at the June 26th committee meeting, finance meeting. There's no meeting on July 3rd. I know we're all very upset about that. July 10th is a council meeting because we shifted the schedule. So no CIP is planned for that night, but there is an open date there just as a note that if we did need to have conversation, we could. And then we would introduce to the Finance Committee the final plan document on July 17th, followed by first reading and public hearing, continued conversation at the July 31st meeting, and then if on this tentative schedule here, formal adoption by you folks in an August 7th, that is scary to say, August 7th timeframe for second reading adoption, but there'll also be a second public hearing at that particular point in time. I really don't know. I'm scared to hit next on my next slide because I think it says questions, which is good.
So does that conclude?
That concludes,
Okay.
that concludes my,
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Obviously, a lot to digest here. I think you covered at length the first 4 sections of a 10-section document. We have, I think, roughly 50 pages of a 147-page document, so again, a lot to digest. Before we leave, or before we conclude committee, I would like council's thoughts on how best to proceed, how do we organize it, but before we get to that, I guess I'll just turn it over to council. Any questions based on the presentation or what you heard this evening from the administration? Yes, Ms. Bedell.
Can you go back to the slide just prior with, yes, right there.
just the dates.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So I do have one question for you for some clarity on, what section is this? The pool infrastructure.
Yes,
the aquatic assessment facilities plan, on page 25, it's listed as 6,060,000. And then when you go to the back, it has it shown as 60,000. I just wanted to check that and see if there's something I wasn't understanding there, or if there's a really large typo.
On the back sheet. So that particular project is for the replacement or the study, and then the potential replacement of one of the pool facilities over at GSP.
Okay, and then the 60,000 is just for the study, I'm
The
assuming?
60,000
Okay,
is just for the study.
thanks, I just wanted some
Yeah.
clarity on that.
And that was, it's one of those situations where, what is the, let's take a slightly different project, but we'll take West Side Sewers as the example, right? We're in the process of studying that particular system and determining those design alternatives for good, better, best solutions. So Mr. Comlank and the engineering department have a list of encumbered money in order to develop those design alternatives. Those design alternatives will ultimately dictate what the construction cost is in order to provide the remedy for West Side Sewers. Same situation happens here, right? So we were going to put in $60,000 to do a study of the pool facilities. How many bodies of water does the city of Gahanna need to manage and maintain for a city population of our size? And does that plan, and this is the unknown part, does that plan dictate that we should be replacing one of the pools over at GASP when it reaches its end of life? That question is largely unknown. So the methodology of should the 6 million be in the plan or should it just be the 60,000? There is a little bit of mixed methodology. You even see it in this one project where the back sheet says 60,000 and the front sheet says 60 million or 6,060,000. So we'll get that cleaned up. We'll make sure that we're reflecting the projects appropriately. In this particular instance, I'm going to say that that's 6,060,000. On the summary sheet here, we'll probably go to 60,000 so we can do the study and then adjust the plan sheet based on what the study says, as opposed to guessing that the replacement cost of the pool is $6 million, because honestly, we don't know.
Thank you.
And that should be throughout the document.
Sure. Anything from council, anything further from council, again, based on what we've heard in the presentation? Mrs. McGregor.
On the page that has like the timelines for the different phases, the last one is a year longer. Is there a reason for that?
No, they should all be 5-year phases. The original plan, it was an initial 3, which then made the back one 7. So thank you, we will get that corrected.
All right, we'll go Mr. Weaver. Stay on
Thank
the left
you,
here.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Schultz. So I think it'd be helpful for me in attempting to digest everything here. I understand that no one project exists in a bubble, and each project will have, whether in terms of funding, will have impacts on other projects, and I'm trying to wrap my head around that while looking at individual projects being laid out. Could you maybe walk us through, Project X and the lifestyle or the life cycle of a project? Say it's a 2 or 3 year project to get completed. Maybe it faces, an unknown issue that results in delay or additional funding is needed. What impacts does that have on any other project? How that gets assessed with maybe the advisory committee for moving forward? I think that would be helpful for me to understand how to use this in future iterations of the plan.
Yeah. So I think the first comment there is that over time, and as this plan matures, those numbers will become better and they will become more well-known. So when a plan gets in here, we know that, they'll use the pool example, we know the pool is going to cost $6 million to replace, and it's in the plan, and it's in the plan appropriately. Again, that's as this plan matures and we get better as an administration of it, assessing a project, budgeting a project, not budgeting, that's the wrong word, estimating a project, and then also knowing what the project timeline is. If we know that it costs, I'll just use some stupid numbers, but $100 a linear foot to replace a water line, it's really not that difficult to know that, okay, the next water line project that we're going to do is 5,000 feet, and it's going to cost us $50,000 in order to do that project, right? Those are easy numbers for us in the engineering department to come up with. We generally know what design would cost in a situation like that, and it's really just taking that science and getting it into the plan in a much more strategic manner. I think when you're looking at the projects at this particular point in time, you'll see, especially on the engineering side, I think on the engineering side, you'll see a lot of studies being done, $100,000 study, $100,000 study, and those are really things that are going to end up going and developing those design alternatives so that we know this is the approach that we want to take to solve a particular problem. Parks and Rec and the information that you see in the Parks and Rec section of this particular document is actually a little bit different because of the work and the advanced work, I'll call it, that they've been able to do on their master plan. They've gone through a lot of this process that the engineering and public service department are already going through. So they know that in the year 2015 that they replaced a particular playground at a particular park, and it cost them a particular amount of money. They know the life cycle on that particular playground is 20 years. So in 2035, that, I think if I have my math correct, sorry if I don't, 2035, that playground needs to be replaced. What they've actually done, I think Steph is back there. Steph, throw something at me when I get this wrong. Is they've actually taken the cost of that playground implementation in 2015 and they've escalated it to a replacement cost in 2035, right? As we get closer to 2035 and the replacement of that actual playground, that number will become more well-known. Maybe we're doing something, space age with playground equipment in the year 2035. Again, as the plan gets more mature, the information gets better. And that's by design. Year one of this particular plan can't, we can't take that whole CNA document and make those corrections and alterations across 150 projects, if you would. Capital maintenance is another example, right? I think a good example is the mayor's slide at State of the City that showed years ago crack seal being, us doing many, many miles of crack seal and very few miles of street rebuilds or asphalt overlay, right? That's a great slide because it illustrated the financial position that the city was in, right? But as we do more streets and those streets get caught up and those streets get maintained and the longevity of those streets gets stretched out, you should actually see crack seal as a preventative maintenance measure actually rise in years in the past, not anytime soon because we have the deferred maintenance side of the asphalt overlay and the street rebuild, right? But when we become more healthy, we're doing preventative maintenance and we're not doing these full-scale replacement projects. I mean, you guys talked and approved the permission to bid on the water tower revitalization project, right? That project was around for, a while, a number of years without the financial resources in order to go and do it. That has had an impact on our ability to get projects done, and it costing us more in 2023 and 2024 to execute on a particular project than if the city had the ability to do that project, 10 years ago, let's say. I don't know the exact circumstances around the water tower. Maybe it's a poor example. But we do have those examples. As it relates maybe to our traffic control network. Our traffic control network is very healthy, but everything has a life cycle. Everything has an expectancy. Everything should be managed and maintained appropriately. And in some instances, there's equipment in those traffic cabinets. While it's functional, it is still, 15, 16, 17 years old. It's like buying a car. So as the plan matures, there'll be better information. I think one of the things, the next iteration of the plan and for 2024 capital budget, what you'll see is a shrunk down 2024 list of projects that is fitting within the budget projections that that we'll have done, and the CIP Advisory Committee, the stakeholders, will be organized and to present to you folks. So your eyes don't go like this, because my eyes have gone like this on a number of occasions as it relates to those 150 projects that are in there.
Thank you.
Good? Good. Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Director Schultz and Director Burry, and all involved on this. Just as a matter of procedure and logistics, I know Council Clerk sent around an email that there are some planned absences at the last meeting of this month. And due to the importance of this discussion and the ability to digest this, I wanted to see if there would be an appetite to instead schedule a Finance Committee meeting on July 10th if there were not the same volume of anticipated absences on the dais.
Any objections from council? I mean, I'm certainly happy to host.
I don't think we would have any objection, whatever works best for council. Certainly, we want the most input we can.
Could I ask a clarifying question? Is that in lieu of or in addition to June 26th?
Could always change your mind. Stay. Oh, I'm sorry.
This does kind of lead me to the lingering question that I wanted to ask all of council, and we'll get there in a minute, but this document to me seems very kind of budget-esque in the sense that there's multiple sections, there's a lot to digest, a lot of numbers. So using that as a predicate, I would suggest that maybe more is better, because as we find out, as we've gone through past budget seasons, you know, we do often have Finance Committee on regular meeting nights and so forth, just to allow more opportunity for comment. So I'm fine if we want to keep the 26th as a Finance Committee meeting. Whoever shows up, great. And then we can also schedule one for the 10th. I would have no objection to that whatsoever.
Yeah, because I think there are some scheduled absences over the summer with travel plans, so perhaps that'll give more council members the opportunity to weigh in and have some more dialogue.
Okay.
Thank you. Did you want to solicit and filter questions? Do you feel that that's necessary?
You beat me to it.
Okay.
Again, that's the lingering question I was kind of alluding to is, again, how do we, as a council, want to tackle this? 150 pages, 10 sections. I mean, there's timeline stuff here. Again, if we want to use the process that we've used in the past, that you know, questions are submitted in advance to the chair of Finance Committee, and then, you know, filtered, sorted, duplicates tossed out, and then passed on to the administration so that they can do kind of the heavy lifting and the homework, and then come back and we have a robust discussion on Monday night. If that's the will of council, again, I'm certainly happy to oblige. Or if there's an alternative way to approach it, again, I'm all ears as well. Would that be your preference? The approach it the same way we've done as with the budget?
I don't know if it's as necessary as perhaps with the budget with this item, but it doesn't hurt. I mean, it seems to have worked very well.
Okay.
The process seems to have worked very well. And it gives the directors an opportunity to research if they get the questions ahead, so I think that that's been useful.
Absolutely.
I see some heads nodding down at the desk, so I guess we'll, in the spirit of being a good partner here.
That would be wonderful, Mrs. Spencer.
Okay.
We would appreciate that greatly.
It helps the dialogue, then we can be better informed to respond to whatever you need, gather the information you need.
Sure. So, with that being said, I guess Jeremy put a tickler on the calendar for the 26th. And to council, to my council colleagues, yeah, if you could just get it to me, so just working backwards, maybe like the preceding Wednesday night, I'll package everything, yeah, whatever that date ends up being, I'll try and get everything compiled by Thursday, and when you guys log in on Friday, have it. Is that enough time, or do you need it earlier than that?
No,
Okay.
that's good.
Okay.
Can I throw one other wrinkle too, this is more for maybe Jeremy and some conversation here. So we were going to introduce you folks to the schematic design exterior of 825 on the 26th. I would propose maybe hosting Mr. Weaver, if it's no objection of yours, a committee of the whole meeting also on July, what would that be? on July 10th as well. Obviously, I would love all 7 of you folks to be here for exterior reveal on that evening.
I'm amenable to that.
I'm sorry?
That works for me. That works for everybody else?
Probably won't be here. Possibly, I don't know.
Is it okay if we plan on that for now? Okay. Let's plan on that then, Mr. Clerk, please.
Thank you. Sorry.
So it sounds like we have a path forward.
I
Mrs.
just
Angel.
want to thank you for all the work that you've done on this, because it, as I was going through it, I'm just sitting there going, oh, there's more, and there's more. It's really well done, and I think that the group of people that you have working with you obviously are doing very good.
So the truth of the matter, Ms. Angelou, is that I drew the short straw and got to sit here in front of you guys and present the work. Because obviously, it's in the mayor's office with Joanne, Miranda, Corey, Tom, and all of the directors, all those stakeholders. Stephanie's back there too. Chief, anybody that has a hand in this is
We have a really good.
we got a great team
good
working on
people
this
working
and making
and-
sure that at all my requests and other requests for that matter, despite everything as far as year-end reports and Q1 reports, that Joanne got me numbers and dealt with my naggy questions about what does this mean. So no, great team working on this, and I get to be fortunate enough to sit up here and present it to you folks.
I have to say that Gahanna is lucky to have a group of people like you doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, because you beat me to it. I wanted to thank Director Schultz, Director Burry, Director Vollmer, Director Weibensinger. You've been sitting here too long. And every single director. I'm pretty sure they were running every time they saw CIP coming up on a scheduling calendar invite. It's been a year and a half plus in the making of putting all this together and going over and over these numbers. And I'm pretty sure Director Schultz is going to be dreaming about these numbers for months to come. But thank you. I know this is just the beginning of the conversation. I expect a lot of robust conversation as we work toward setting the path for Gahanna, but I appreciate the work that's been done to date and look forward to the continuing discussion, so thank you.
Anything else for the good of the order? Mr. Malarkey?
Everything's done here. I was going to try to give council some guidance on a couple cases I found in answer to Councilwoman Bauer's question earlier. It was determined in Halstead v. Jackson that an ordinance was properly passed as emergency legislation to increase the city's income tax revenue, to protect the city's infrastructure investments in the land that's to be developed, and to ensure the city would have influence over and able to fund the infrastructure improvements. Second one, Laughlin v. James, states that the ordinance was not illusory, thank you, as to render the reasons for an emergency insufficient when those reasons were, so these were sufficient, to let a developer begin planning commission proceedings to prevent further delay, given the time limits on the acceptance of the project, and to alleviate uncertainty as to planning for future growth. So I hope that helps you in determining whether or not this could be an emergency. That's all.
Thank you. Anything else for the good of the order here? All right, everyone, thus concludes finance. Enjoy the rest of your week.